Good morning, everybody. This is Mike, and I just wanted to go over a couple of images with you from last night's shoot. And I'm sending this out to both sessions because during the first session on August 20th, we didn't have great conditions for shooting HDR, so we didn't get great results. We practiced the techniques, we went through the whole exercise, but we didn't get great results. So I want to show you what you can get when you actually have better conditions. And last night on the shoot, we had really good conditions. We had no wind at all, and we had just a gorgeous, beautiful sunset. So I want to show you what you can get out of having the right conditions so that it will encourage you to go back and just give it a try when you have the chance. So I've selected 3 images here. And I'm just going to pull up the library and make these thumbnails much, much bigger so you can see them. And this was towards the end of the end of the sunset. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I'm shooting at f/22. I'm at ISO 400. I'm shooting at f/22, and I'm shooting 3 different shots, bracketed shots, 2 stops apart from each other. So the first one was f/22 at 1/4 of a second, and then the dark one was 1/15 of a second, and then the light one was for a full second. So this is the result. And to get the HDR image, what I do is I just select all 3, and you'll see down at the bottom of the screen I'm selecting all 3. And I do a lot of keyboard shortcuts and a lot of right clicks. So if I right click here and go up to Photo Merge and go to HDR, it will bring up the HDR merge preview, and it'll say, hey, do you want to do that? I'm like, yeah, I want to do that. So it'll go through the process of creating the HDR. You can see in the upper left-hand corner, it says creating HDR. And then right next to your selection of 3 or 5 or 7 or how many other images you use, you get your selected image, your result. So here is the result of my my HDR image. So now what I'm going to do is I can do a lot of things to this, but I'm going to show you a couple more advanced things because in Lightroom, the limitation is that you're pretty much working on the entire image. You can do some things with like graduated neutral density filters and things like that, which is great. I mean, I'll show you here real quick what you can do. There we go. And I can pull that down, and I can bring down the sky, which is cool. I mean, that's a nice effect. That helps a lot. And I can do some other things with the sunflowers. But I want to show you another effect that is a bit more of an advanced effect, but it shows the reason why I go from Lightroom to Photoshop and back and forth all the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click again. I'm going to go edit in and bring up Photoshop. And Photoshop will come up. And I'm going to introduce you to a couple of things. Number 1, layers. Number 2, masking. And number 3, luminosity masking. And while this is coming up, I'll tell you what happens. In Photoshop, you can do things in layers. So you can it's like the old acetate film that your teachers used to write on, if you remember that in school, and they'd use the overhead projector. It's a similar thing. So whatever you see on the top layer, you see first, and then if there's a mask that you can see through, that shows through the bottom layer. And then luminosity masking is actually the masking and the manipulation of the image as it relates to the light intensity or the luminosity of the image. So as you can see, I have got my image pulled up. The first thing I'm going to do is just right click and convert it to a smart object. What that does is it allows me to go back and fix anything if I need to. And in the layers palette, you'll see it will get like a little thumbnail picture down at the bottom right, and that shows it's a smart object. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is make a selection with the quick selection tool, And again, for those of you who don't work in Photoshop, I get it, you might zone off or whatever, but just bear with me because I'm trying to plant a seed that there's something else you can do with your photography over and above just kind of skimming through what you normally might do because you haven't taken the time or don't have the time or Photoshop's kind of intimidating or whatever the reason, you just haven't gotten into it yet. I'm trying to create a good argument for you to learn Photoshop a little bit better. So I have made a selection of this entire sky, okay? I'm going to click what's called the Select and Mask tool. And it brings up another part of Photoshop. Zoom in a little bit. And what I do is I go over here and I select this second tool from the top called the Refine Edge Brush tool. And all I do is I make a sample. It's just like the clone tool. There's a plus there, and I just click down in the sky area. And basically what we're looking for is what's different than the sky. And if it looks like the sky, we want it selected. If it doesn't look like the sky, we want it deselected. And you'll see as I go through this, the sky areas and the trees will just totally populate. And I'm just skimming along the horizon here. It will paint in the sun a little bit. You'll see these trees go from like a yellow to a red, which indicates the selection has been taken care of. And I'm doing the same thing here with this big clump of trees here. Okay, so this is Photoshop. And then what I'm going to do is I want the selection to overlap just a little bit into the foreground. So I'm going to shift the edge of it by 1%. And there's that. I click OK. My output is a normal selection. All right. Now, I really don't want to work on the sky right now. I want to work on the sky using another technique I told you about called luminosity masking. What I really want to have an impact on right now is the sunflowers. So I'm going to click Select and Inverse, and you'll notice that now just my sunflowers are selected. And all I have to do is go down to this tool called Curves. And I click on Curves. It's going to impact the area that's selected, and it's going to create a new layer. Right now, you'll see on the Layers palette, I only have one layer. It's called Layer 0. When I click on Curves, it will create another layer called the Curves Adjustment layer. And what I can do with that Curves Adjustment layer is something that should look fairly familiar to you. It looks like a histogram. If I make a selection by clicking the eyedropper tool, like in the dark, and then in the lighter area, let's try like here, then what I can do is I can actually drag this down and watch what happens. The darks are getting darker and the sunflowers are going to get brighter. And I've got really cool contrast stuff going on there. But guess what? My darks are getting a little bit too dark. So I'm going to fix that here in just a moment. But I'm really liking the color of my sunflowers. So to fix the darks, remember I told you I changed the layer 1 to a smart layer. I'm going to go back to that smart layer now. I just clicked on it, and I'm going to click Filter, Camera Raw Filter. You should see something come up that looks pretty darn familiar. For those of you who work in Photoshop exclusively, this is the Adobe Camera Raw plugin. For those of you who work in Lightroom specifically, this is the Lightroom Develop module. It's pretty much the same algorithm. It just, they just plug it into different tools, different ways. When you're in Photoshop, you will not see the layers that are impacting on it when you bring this up. So you just have to know that going in. I'm going to bring up the shadows just a little bit and the blacks just a little bit. That's really all I want to do is have an impact on those two items. And then I'm going to click OK. And you'll see they got brighter. And because it's a smart filter, normally when you go into HDR in Photoshop, it just makes a change, it doesn't do anything, you can't get back into it. But because I made it a smart filter, I can double click on this again. It comes back up again. You see my settings are still the same, and I can actually go in and I can make a little bit more because I need a little bit more up from those shadows. I'm going to click OK again, and you should see a little bit of a change there. So now it's time to work on the sky. And I'm going to stay on this layer, and I'm going to go over to a palette called the Channels palette. And you'll see RGB, and then you'll see separate channels for red, green, and blue. And then you'll see this filter mask that I just created. So everything ends up in channels. I'm going to click on RGB just by itself. And then I'm going to hit Command button or Control on your PC, and I'm going to hit Command RGB. There we go. And it gives me a selection of all the areas in the image that are the kind of the brightest brights. And what I do to that is I go down, I'm going to move this out of the way, and I go down to this thing that looks like a mask, this little icon. It says Save Selection as a Channel. If I click on that, it creates a channel called Alpha 1. Now, anytime in Photoshop, I can double click on that Alpha 1, and I can just call it Lights 1. And I'm just going to do that right there. So then if I want to do that again, if I want to get another iteration of the lights, all I have to do, let me get back to my RGB channel. All I have to do is hit Command, Option, Shift, and click again, and it makes another different selection. You can see that this one is different than the other one. I go back again and I click on the mask. It turns into Alpha 1 again, and I just rename it Lights 2. And you can keep doing this as far as you want to go. Usually I go down like 3 or 4 iterations. So I'll do it one more time. And I did it one more time, and I'm going to click down there and make Lights 3. And that should be enough. And again, if I select the inverse of this, I can do it with the darks. So I'm actually working in many different areas here. So now I'm going to go back to Command and click on my lights, and I've got that highlighted. I have to make sure that I'm seeing color here in the RGB channel, and I go back to Layers. I'm going to go over to Curves again and click on the Curves adjustment. I'm going to make a new Curves adjustment just on the lights. And I know this is really advanced stuff if you're just used to working in Lightroom or if you're just a beginner, whatever, but I'm just here to show you the different things that are possibilities. And all I'm going to do is drag this down a little bit, and you can see that things are starting to change. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is go back to the channels, and I'm going to Command click on Lights again. I'm sorry, Lights 2 again. And I'm going to do the same thing on the Layers palette. I'm going to click and do Curves adjustment here. Here's our Curves adjustment. We're going to drag it down. So we're making impact on a lot of these different flowers and a lot of the sky. I'm going to do one more time and get the Lights 3 adjustments, which is the, just another iteration of these lights. But this is where all the color is in the sky from last night. So I really want to get this. I'm going to click on Curves one more time. Here we go. I'm going to drag that down, and there we go. Look at that. We're getting color out of that sky. And guess what? We've got color in the sunflowers too. But it's probably just a little bit too much. It's a little bit over the top for me in the sunflowers. And the sun is a little bit too bright. So we're going to make a little bit of an adjustment here. I'm going to stay on my mask. And remember I said anytime you paint with black or show through, painting with black shows through to the next layer. That will show you the next layer, and it will make a change in your image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an impact on the sunflowers a little bit. And all I'm going to do is paint with black at full opacity and just work on a little bit of the additional stuff that happened in my sunflowers. And there we go. Oh yeah, now we're getting it back. Let me zoom in just a little bit and see if there's anything that looks really kind of wonky. Yeah, I'm going to undo that one. And I'm going to lower the opacity to about 55%. Just do that a little bit. And overall, I'm pretty happy with the way this thing is looking. I really, really like it. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the X button. It's going to save back into Lightroom. And if I need to, I can make any other little adjustments in Lightroom if I want to. So I ended up using probably 4 or 5 adjustments to get this image to where it is. But this is the difference between taking an image right out of Lightroom and making a few little adjustments in Lightroom or even Photoshop if you work in that, and taking it to the next level. Maybe you want to get into competition, maybe you want to show a nicer image to the camera club, maybe you want to print it or frame it for your house. And this is how you do that. Let me close that out. I'm going to click Save, and it will save back into Lightroom. Okay, so now we're back in Lightroom, and we're taking a look at the images. Let's look at them side by side for a moment. So here is the result image. Here's where we started. And if you ask me, it looks a lot better on the right-hand side. There's a couple of things with the darks that we can work on, and I can show you how to do that here in just a moment. But side by side, I think that our Photoshopped image looks a lot better. If I were to make any other adjustments, I might bring the blacks up just a little bit, and maybe even the shadows just a little bit more, not a whole lot. And I think we'll call that image good. And so that's an example of where you can go with an image from the beginning. 3 images here, this one, and this one. We created HDR bracketed images. It ended up looking like this. And then we took it a little bit further and ended up looking like this. So we actually got everything out of the sky and everything out of the flowers that we wanted. Hope that helps. Hope you had a good time on both shoots, whichever one you were on, and I will see you at the edit and critique. Thank you.